A lot of times when people think about wellness, people think about kind of getting to that point where they're just kind of relaxed and chill. They associate that somehow with wellness. Most of the times it felt really rewarding. Most of the times I felt good. It was either after a challenge or if it was after hard work or maybe both. And yeah, I need my rest. I need to relax. I need to find those moments, but that's not my end point. I know there's going to be lots of times in my life where I'm going to have to lean into hard work. And when that happens, I'm going to be ready to do that instead of discouraged or wishing I didn't have. And if you actually think about it, if you think back to your life, maybe most of the things that really mean something to you came from hard work too.
Welcome to the Mindform podcast, where we delve into the minds of some of the most interesting people on the planet, discuss psychology, philosophy, and personal growth, and share the wisdom we uncover with you. Join us as we explore the art of forming our minds. Here's your host, Frank Lawton.
Kia ora from New Zealand. Welcome to the Mindform podcast. An extension of the Mindform collective and training platform, this podcast is similarly a space dedicated to exploring and altering psychological landscapes together. In each weekly episode, I speak with a new guest, generally members of Mindform, to extract wisdom, refine ideas, and collaborate on the game of architecting our minds. This week's guest is John Webster. How you doing, John?
I'm doing great. It's actually, by coincidence, it's election day in Canada, so lots going on here.
That is a lot, yeah. Well, you are based in Kitchener, Canada. That's right, eh? Are you in Kitchener?
That's right. Kitchener, Ontario, Canada.
Yeah. Ontario, awesome. So John is the author of Accidentally Well, a book documenting his journey into wellness through fitness, and he's host of the Let's Be Well Together podcast, which is where him and a few other wise folk discuss the different facets of wellness. So he's a lawyer by trade, and John joined Mindform in 2024. He has an interest in holistic wellness, and not so much as an end goal, but a quality of life every day and every moment. And his book and podcast discuss the model he has around this, which has eight facets of wellness. I'm excited to learn more about John's philosophy and story and unique wisdom in this conversation. Great. Well, actually, let's just get started. And my first question for you is, can you start by giving us a high-level overview of your whole approach to wellness?
Yes, I've learned in my profession, actually, that what I used to do is kind of build my way up and then tell somebody where I was trying to go. But it's useful to go right from the start to kind of lay things out and then work back to explain how I got there. And so I'll just start by talking about my strategic plan that I've recently developed for well-being, and then a 3-step approach that I use, which is more granular in terms of the steps I actually take. And just for quick background now, this is a very practical approach. And it's not just about physical wellness, but it's me who at a certain time in my life wished I'd had a practical approach a lot earlier. And I'm just trying to communicate one that works well for me, hoping that other people might be able to make use of it. So a strategic plan, first of all, what is a strategic plan? A lot of organizations put them together and they speak to long-term goals and priorities. And a lot of times there's a whole bunch of action items that they throw in there. But when I'm using the concept for today, it's a more limited sense. I want to talk about vision and goals and broad objectives. And of course, you have to have an acronym. And so my acronym is GET, GET, and I call it Get Wellbeing. The G is for grow, the E is for embrace hard work, and the T is for together. And the experience of my life tells me, after lots of thoughts and good and bad and different experiences, that if I focus on those objectives to grow, to embrace hard work, and to remember about being together with others, it's a great way for me to work towards well-being. So starting with grow, after much thought and reflection, and as I said, trial and error and life experience, it actually surprised me. But my conclusion is that my best chance to achieve well-being is to try and become a well-rounded person. And I mean that in a really straightforward way, to be capable of doing a whole bunch of practical things. And that could be from being athletic, to being good at my profession, to developing my intellect, learning how to cook, learning how to fix things around the house, just to be decent at a broad range of practical activities. And in some cases, the ones I really like, to push for excellence in the activities that I cherish. And bottom line, we're always changing. The world is always changing. We're constantly in flux. If that's the case, I want to choose that as an opportunity to grow, to challenge myself, to learn new things, to be curious. And although it's not directly on point, this touches on the idea of compartmentalizing too, which I think is a really, really important point to living in the moment and doing well at all this stuff. When I work, I work. When I'm cooking, I cook. When I'm running, I run. It's really important to focus on the activity you're doing, because most of my life I spent fretting or being concerned about the future or the past and not doing the thing that I'm trying to do. And that also takes me to embrace hard work. And this was another surprise too. I think a lot of times when people think about wellness, at least for me, people I talk to, people think about, kind of getting to that point where they're just kind of relaxed and chill. They associate that somehow with wellness.
Yeah.
But when I look back
On
at
the beach.
my life, most of the times it felt really rewarding. Most of the times I felt good. It was either after a challenge, or if it was after hard work, or maybe both. And yeah, I need my rest. I need to relax. I need to find those moments, but that's not my end point. I know there's going to be lots of times in my life where I'm going to have to lean into hard work. And when that happens, I'm going to be ready to do that instead of discouraged or wishing I didn't have. And if you actually think about it, if you think back to your life, maybe most of the things that really mean something to you came from hard work too. And then
That's absolutely, that came up for me as you were talking. It's funny, because we think that the point of hard work even is just to get to the place where we don't have to do it, and somehow don't notice how much fun we're having.
Exactly. And by the way, so Ryan Bush, I recently interviewed him on my podcast, and we were talking about Nietzsche.
Cool.
We were talking about Nietzsche and getting beyond good and evil, and that concept comes up with Nietzsche too, that hard work is something that helps. So the T is for together. We're social animals. There's a whole bunch of things I can talk about in that context. I feel really great when I help other people. My ideas are better when I talk to people. Example today, we accomplish more together. And even though I'm an introvert who really likes to spend time alone, I realize the importance of being with other people for lots of reasons. And I think that our best chance for success is together. And then if I was going to kind of put everything together, the ancient Greeks, and I think I also talked to Ryan about this, the ancient Greeks used the word arete in the context of ethics and living a good life, which all translates into excellence. And when they spoke of somebody with surpassing arete, they mean people who showed excellence and were really well-rounded. So if I want to imagine a person, let's call them an enlightened person, here are some of the characteristics I would imagine that person has. They recognize the different areas of wellness. They develop activities that foster wellness in each category, including their signature strengths that they find in themselves. Kind of like the Stoics and the Buddhists, they recognize that they're not in control, and you have to take life as it comes. It's not something you control. They're not trying to get to a spot. They're not trying to get to a state. They accept that balance is elusive. And even if they achieve it, they know it's fleeting. For a short time, they can hold it for a short time, and then it'll disappear. And then they can work to regain it again. And they're at peace, even though they don't hold balance forever. And they're experiencing the process of finding, losing, and regaining balance, which is a flow. And they're in that constant state of flow in life. And then getting down to the granular level, which is really what the idea I talk about in my book. So the strategic plan has come to me over the years of doing the podcast. The book focuses on this granular approach, which is 3 steps. And I'm sure we'll get into more detail. But first, identify my categories of wellness. And you can call them facets, areas, whatever you like. Second, figure out activities that nourish each category. And lastly, there's a practical wellness check-in that I do. because I know what my areas of wellness are, because I know what activities help those areas, if I'm feeling off, I can take a moment to figure out what I'm missing. And usually I'll find the source of why I'm feeling off. So that's my overall approach. It's not a quick fix. There's no gimmick. It's not tied to any religion. There's no secret handshake. Essentially, what you need to do is start with some introspection, and then there's a good helping of investigation and analysis that you got to do for yourself. And then the important thing is it's action based. You need to act. You need to start doing the activities that are going to enhance your different areas of wellness. So there you go.
Awesome. I love that. It's just, there is like this larger theme that's coming together, and it reminds me of this thought I had a few weeks ago. It's like life is made of time, not outcomes, because everything is just constantly changing, and yeah, your life is just a collection of moments. And I think so often people, when they're trying to be well, they're trying to do well, they're trying to have a life that they like. They think it's work to get to a place, and it's be at that place and preserve that place. But I think when you say that Stoic and Buddhist idea of accepting what's outside of your control, that just that constant change and that ebb and flow is inevitable. And so wellness has to become, okay, how am I spending my time? Like, where am I at, and am I taking the actions now that are conducive to wellness, to a good life, to balance, and kind of accepting that it's about, the whole process is just about what am I going to do? What are the actions I'm taking? How am I responding each day, right? Rather than this, just driving to be somewhere. So I really like that reminder, because it's such a cause of anxiety, at least for me. Is, okay, am I like perfect? Is everything perfect right now or not? And then how are all the strategies? What are all the actions? What's the unenjoyable hard work that I have to do for that outcome? But that's not what life is. So brilliant.
Well, a
Thank you,
couple
John.
quick points. First of all,
Yeah.
like you're right in terms of people not living in the present, trying to think about a goal in the future. Probably one of my favorite expressions is, it's a joke. It's about the old guy who's on his deathbed and he says, I had a lot of troubles in my life, none of which happened. The idea is
Yeah.
he spent a lot of his time worrying about what might happen that didn't happen, or some variation of the past that didn't happen. So, being distracted from the present. But secondly, I don't know how to articulate this yet. It's a feeling I've had lately, but you talk about what you were just saying. You were talking about, like, how do I know if I'm well? What do I need to do to become well? How can I do this activity to become well? And my experience has been not to think about that. Instead of trying to judge whether I'm well, instead of trying to assess what I need to do to be well, I just live my life. I do the actions. I know what activities I need to do, and I introduce new ones. Some can be fun. And I focus more on living my life. I don't really, if it's going well, I don't have to sit back and say, hey, am I well? What I have noticed, though, in the converse is, if I'm feeling off, that's when I do a little step back and say, why am I feeling off? And I'll often find, like, maybe it's on my social side. I haven't seen my friends or my family or something, or maybe it's economic. I've got a really big stressful economic problem that's dominating my time. So, for me, it's not so much about analyzing the wellness, it's just living.
Absolutely. It reminds me of just, you mentioned the Stoic and the Buddhist don't focus too much on what's outside of your control. There's a similar sentiment in the Bhagavad Gita, which I think is a Hindu text, which kind of the most repeated line, I'm probably wrong about this, but a very repeated line in the book is, do the work without expectation of reward. Like, joy and balance is, it's, your focus is on, what am I doing, not have I got the thing that I'm trying to get through my action yet? How close am I? That's anxious, but the doing is, it's easy. Um, Yeah, Ryan says that's one of his favorite ideas from Hinduism he's come across. Yeah, absolutely. Same. I think of it all the time. It's
Well, I do have a
draws
very
me back.
visceral example, which is I
Yes,
fell in
that
love with
sounds good.
running about 10 years ago. And I have all these different variations on why I like to run. And, it's like, well, because it's how great you feel after, or how all this other stuff. And more recently, I'm out there and I'm like, this is living. Like running is living. I'm living my life right now. And it feels amazing. Like there's so many, it's hard work and all that stuff. But when you're
Mm,
under, it really is a form of stressor. And when you got stressors going, a lot of your feelings are enhanced. A lot of your sensations are enhanced. And so if you can enjoy them, it's really amazing. So if you just can focus on what you're doing and living, even in times of stress, it's a pretty incredible way to live your life. And you're going to sense a lot of different amazing things.
absolutely. And I'm excited to get into um a bit more of the process you have for like reflecting and finding out what makes you well, because I think making a connection like you've just made is something that you do have to step back and think about it to realize, oh, actually this is when I feel alive, this is when I feel good. Our assumptions about that aren't necessarily the same as reality, I found. But that's probably a good opportunity. You mentioned you started running about 10 years ago. I know that has something to do with your journey into wellness. So, could you tell a bit of the story of how you ended up to the philosophy and the model you have today around wellness?
Yeah. So if you don't mind, I'll just steal the mic for a little bit, just because it is kind of a story. I'll kind of give you the condensed version. I'll skim over my history and how things went wrong. There's a lot more about that in the book. But the good news, I studied philosophy at University of Waterloo almost 40 years ago. And back then, I naively thought that I would find answers to all of life's questions. I was only 19, 18, so, of course, I should have known better. I never did find those answers. And then I got busy with life. I had a family, work, finances, and more. And decades passed. And interestingly, I was happy. People are surprised to hear that, but I was happy, which I don't think is the same as well. And I started to become more and more overweight. And at some point when I think it was just after I turned 50, I'd really let my physical side go, and I had gained more and more weight. I ate too much, the wrong food. And I tried to figure that out, but it wasn't working very well. And one day I looked in the mirror, I didn't even recognize myself. And I just thought, how in the world could I let this happen? Like, what has happened here? Anyway, the good news is that was 2014, and that started a period over years where, starting slow and working slow, I found the desire and a way to turn things around physically. And there's lots of failures along the way, lots of successes, but at long last, things worked out well. And like, again, I say more about that in the book. I'm not going to say a lot about it here. But I fell in love with distance running, which is a big surprise. I've always hated running ever since grade school. I was bad at it. I found out how to do it in a better way. And with distance running, I had a lot of time to think. And I'm out there running. And now I believe too that because I was being physical in a way that humans are designed to be, that opened some doors in my mind that had been closed. Because I think while I'm working out, it's a good way to actually think, which is something I wouldn't have considered earlier. And I started thinking back to my philosophy days. I started thinking back to some of the big questions in life. And like one of the things that I find interesting, and we can talk a little bit about this later, but I was thinking about the concept of nirvana, right? And what is that? I don't really know. But the key point for the purpose of the story is, for a lot of people, this concept, I don't think a lot of us in the Western world will be able to describe it properly, but I think at the very least, a lot of us think of it as the concept of arriving at a state. That if you do all the right things and you know how to get to nirvana, you're going to be at this state and you'll have fulfillment and you'll be able to hang out there forever. Now, I'm pretty sure that if I actually talked to somebody who knew about it, he would tell me that, or she would tell me that I'm wrong. But in any event, that's what I was thinking. And also because I was a philosophy student, probably, I used to always think that the real answer is going to be somewhere in the intellect, that it wasn't really like that the body was something that we're supposed to overcome, and that somehow we're supposed to rise above that to get to some state of enlightenment. Okay. So then that's happening. I'm running, I'm having all these thoughts. And then a couple things happened. First of all, I attended through my work something called mental health first aid training. And essentially what that is if it's for my office. If somebody in the office was experiencing some type of traumatic event, some kind of mental health issue, a whole bunch of us were trained so they could come in and talk to us. And we can't fix the problem, but just like I couldn't fix a broken arm, I can at least maybe help the person. A lot of it has to do with active listening, and then hopefully find a way to get the person support if need be. Maybe they just want to talk. And when I was at that training course, the person said a couple things to me that I hadn't thought of before. One of them was that a lot of Indigenous communities around the world share a common feature where they talk about many areas of wellness, many facets of wellness. And a second one that kind of sprung a thought was that she mentioned in some Nordic countries, they're way ahead of us on mental health than Canada. And actually Australia and I think New Zealand are doing pretty good too. But one of the things they did in the Nordic countries was when they were talking about mental health, things to help people, they would think about what they could financially sustain over a long period of time. And so then that got me starting to think about different areas of wellness, but also trade-offs. Okay, I want to do this thing for wellness, but if it costs money, maybe that affects that. So I had this thought about trade-offs between categories of wellness. And the second thing was that I had developed what I call a running form check-in. So I didn't know anything about running, so I was teaching myself and reading lots of books and watching lots of videos. And I eventually came up with this check-in where if I was running and I wasn't feeling great, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I got to, do something with your head, do something with your hips, do something with my legs, do something with my core. And so I had these different categories, 4 or 5 categories, and then different actions to bring me back on track. So that's floating in the back of my head. And so then I started thinking to myself, what are my categories of wellness? If Indigenous people have these different categories, probably I think some of them are the same as mine, but what are mine? And I came up with my list of 8. So my 8 categories of wellness that I came up with: mental, artistic, physical, environmental, social, spiritual, economic, and intellectual. And you just can go to letsbewelltogether.com and you'll see a picture of it if it's hard to remember. But I thought of others and I took them off, and artistic was one that a lot of people don't have. But to me, art is such an important part of my well-being. And I don't consider these to be set in stone for everybody. These are mine. So then I started thinking about, okay, well, let me take any one of those. Like, how can I enhance, for example, physical wellness? Well, exercise, core, aerobics, strength. How can I help economic? Getting a job I enjoy, budgeting. What are some tied to environmental? Walking on a forest path makes me feel good. Trying to create an environment that's safe for people to be in. Keeping a clean house. And as I started thinking about all these activities, I'm like, okay, got all these activities and they're fostering these different areas. And I kind of see the activities as building blocks. And if you can work on these building blocks over time, they eventually start to become second nature. But you have to, like, if you want to achieve physical wellness, just focus on physical for a second. You can figure out, do Google searches, read books, think about your own life experience. You could come up with a list of 10, 15 things that you could do to improve your physical wellness. And you could do that same thing with each of the different categories. And so then what I call my epiphany. So here's where it kind of came together. I was out for a run. And I'm still convinced that this would not have happened if I was sitting in a comfy chair or at a desk in a library. I think it happened because I was out for a run and these doors were open because of the exercise and I was chill in the right frame of mind. But essentially what occurred to me is like, wait a minute, I could do a wellness check-in the same way as I do my running form check-in. If I'm out for a run and my form is off, I'm like, okay, straighten my head, bring my hips forward, straighten out my legs, do all these different things. Because I could actually sit there and say, what's going wrong? And I could tell that like I'm bent over the wrong way. So why can't I do that with wellness too? If I have my categories, if I develop my list, and I actually have bullet point lists for these categories. If I develop my lists and I'm feeling off, I bet you if I go back and look at those lists, I'll figure out what I'm missing and why I feel off. And it worked. So it was this really basic common sense approach that was kind of hiding in plain sight. And there is a positive side to it too, because if you are feeling off, and my wife doesn't write anything down, she just thinks of it in her mind. But if you actually have some stuff written down and you start going through your lists in these different categories to see what's off, the positive side is you're like, wow, I got a lot of really great stuff going on in my life. Right? It makes you feel better because you realize you're only missing a few things and you got a lot of good things. So, to sum it up, and thanks for your patience, the 3-step approach on the practical side is to first, just to repeat it, to first identify my categories of wellness. Secondly, figure out activities that nourish each category. And then 3, develop a wellness check-in. And, I won't get right into it, but there's a bunch of questions you can ask yourself in that context.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I've been writing as you've been talking because a lot of stuff has come up for me, and something you talked about a little bit, which last time we spoke didn't come up, which means maybe it's a sort of a newer idea, where you mentioned the running sort of put you in a frame of mind, I suppose. And something I've been thinking about in relation to that is that there's a way that we're already set up to be well. You know, being well, thriving is not sort of the construction of some perfection out of the mess that is us, or the chopping away of all the bad bits, or the sculpting into something perfect. It's really an appreciation and an understanding of what we naturally want and need, and just providing that and allowing that to come. And I've often found that benefit where if I provide what my system needs to be doing well, then it just opens these doors, and it empowers me in all these other areas. So, like, I guess another way to word that is, if one of my areas of wellness, so for example, one that's a big impact for me is social, right? So if I just not haven't chatted to my sisters for a while, or whatever it is, it really creates this bottleneck on everything. And it's actually it's just because normally, naturally, my system, my whole being, myself, my body, whatever, that's part of what it utilizes, part of what it needs in order to think, in order to get perspective, in order to feel whole, in order to thrive. And so if that's something that's missing for me, just reaching out to my sisters and having a phone call can really just restore me to a place where suddenly it's easier to manage these other parts of my wellness as well.
They're all interrelated, and you can think of examples where doing something in one category will help another. But a couple quick points too, like focusing on the physical side. Like if people take nothing else from what I say today, I like to make a pitch for people to get in touch with their physical selves and really pay attention to their physical health, exercise, and that includes aerobic, core strength, stretching, eating healthy, natural food in moderation, doing these things. If you do that, like my experience was, that changed everything for me. And it helps every area of wellness. And, if you think about it, I don't say that everybody needs to run. Obviously, some people can, some people can't for various reasons, but everybody should be able to do something. And think about it yourself too. Like, how many times, I really believe that it helps on the intellectual side too. How many times have you gone for a walk and come up with a solution to a problem, or a run or bike ride or whatever it happened to be? And another one that works really well is, I've talked to a lot of people on the podcast about this effect, and I think it's a great one. A lot of times for parents and kids, when it's time to have some kind of heart-to-heart talk, many times the best ones happen in a couple scenarios. One is you're going for a walk. Another one is you're on a long car drive. And part of the issue is because you're not looking at each other, you're side by side. It's a little easier to talk. But for me particularly, if you're going through a walk, especially if you're in a forest path, I just feel like a lot of good stuff comes out of it. So the physical side is really important. And, my experience was to stop getting out of the ivory tower, get down to the real life. And I
Mm.
really believe that makes a big difference.
Yeah, I wonder how much it's kind of human nature or how much it's cultural, but there does seem to be, you say just when you say the ivory tower there does seem to be this um sense that we should be above or beyond our bodies, that we should be these perfect, objective, rational, unfeeling maybe beings that make the right decisions, and all of this stuff of needing social support or needing to look after our bodies or whatever it is, needing to check in with our feelings, like all of that. People, I've certainly had this, especially when I was a little bit younger, like have this feeling that you shouldn't need all of that or something. And if you were perfect or really onto it, you could just kind of just skip that part. But yeah, I found the same for the physical component as well. That actually maybe what I need is like just go to bed on time for a few days and
Really important.
drink some water. You get so caught up in your head, and it's like, oh, actually, am I even just looking after myself?
It's a good first place. It's a good place to start. Whenever you're feeling
Mm.
off, a good place to start is drink more water and get more sleep.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Yeah, and exercise as well. Have you read Born to Run, that book?
I haven't. I actually have it saved for on my Libby app, which is an audiobook app, but I'm just waiting for it to become free, but I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, well, I'm very surprised that you haven't read it because well, you might get nothing new from it because it sounds very, very similar to much of what you've been saying. This sentiment that that's what our bodies need, but also there's a little. I actually discovered the book after I don't know if it's an international thing or not, but there was this cafe in the city I used to live in, uh, and it was owned by, like, I don't know, it was like a spiritual group attached to some spiritual leader who's dead by now, called Sri Chinmoy. And his whole thing is like he's really, really into fitness and physical activity, but as a spiritual path. And a lot of the people who get involved are really into long distance running. Um, but it talks about how, especially for the really long runs, there's so much that goes on there in terms of, well, one, the need to master your mind in order to keep running and to manage all of the different feelings that are coming up and all of that, but also just how conducive that is to giving your body and your whole system what it needs to have clarity and to be thriving. And in that book, Born to Run, the author tells a story of this. So he was running with the Tarahumara, which is this tribe. You've probably heard of them, but it's this tribe of people in, I think, the southern USA or northern Mexico, but that part of the world, who they do a lot of running, and people run, the women and the men and the children and the elderly, they're all running, and they could run like crazy, and they just strap these little slabs of cutout tires that people throw away in the desert onto their feet, or they run barefoot, and they just do it all the time. It's just part of their culture and the way that they get around and live their lives. And he was going on this very long run with them and some others, and there was this moment with one of the women. There was this trauma unfolding where, just by being out there in the world, moving her body, there's something about it, something about moving through space and moving through space with other people, and the rhythm as well, the rhythm of that. And yeah, maybe what the physical movement does to her sort of nervous system or something as well. But she'd experienced some trauma a few years before, and she had this huge processing moment of that trauma where she was finally able to sit with it and have it all come up and have a huge cry and everything, but really process it in a way that you're not able to do in the commute, or in your office, or sitting inside behind a desk, or whatever it is. There is really something we're meant. It's meant to be a part of how we live day to day and process things, I would say.
Okay, well, I guess another concept we need to talk about those. So, like, if you think about this, there's these 8 different areas, right? So you're thinking about mental, you're thinking about spiritual, you're thinking about social, and the rest of them. And I'm telling you that it's action based. It's about actually
Hmm.
doing stuff, activities that take time to foster each area. So obviously, there's not enough time in the day to have them all going at any given time.
Fair enough.
And so, if you want, I can tell you some of my analogies so I can help explain an
Please.
approach to balance that might make sense. And I think first the main key is when I started writing my book, believe it or not, I was going to try and come up with a formula like you want X% of this and Y% of that. It's going to be
Huh.
famous.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I realized that's misguided. And one of the keys too is then if you know what you're balancing, how are you balancing? That's another question. And I've come to conclude that you're not trying to find balance at any given spot in your life. You're trying to find balance over the course of your lifetime. Okay. And think of it in that context. And that's why, for example, especially economic, um, in my profession, you have to work extremely hard for a bunch of years to kind of be successful. And people say, well, you don't have a work-life balance. And I can have a whole other conversation of why I don't believe there is a work-life balance. Um, but to me, that's okay because I'm thinking about balancing all these categories over the course of my lifetime. But let me give you a few examples of trying to balance these activities that make sense to me. And so I have a surfing analogy. I have an analogy from the movie book Eat, Pray, Love. And I also have an analogy for my wife. I call it Sheila's dance balance analogy because she's a ballet dancer and she told me something that made sense. But so surfing, I've never done surfing. Maybe I can come down to New Zealand and try it sometime. Although I think like in Canada, you need to have a wetsuit because it's kind of cold water over there. But I often daydream about doing it. And I think about the feeling of freedom I'd have and how amazing it would be to experience the power of the ocean. But the reason I use it as an analogy is because in my imagination, someday I'll catch the perfect wave, right? So I'm on the perfect wave. It's amazing. And I want to see it through to the end. And if I'm slavish to a formula to balance, like what happens? I'm halfway to shore and I'm like, oh, I'm looking at my watch. It's time to do some other activity. Got to get off the perfect wave. No, I want to ride that wave as far as I can. And you can just fill in the blank in your life, the analogy to when you're on that perfect wave. You might be ignoring several areas of wellness in order to experience that amazing feeling. You should be able to do that. Thinking about it over the course of a lifetime. And then in Eat, Pray, Love, I don't know if you know that book, but the main character, Liz, goes on, she's seeking balance in her life. It's mostly spiritual balance that she's looking for, but there's physical too. Anyway, so she goes to Italy and then she goes to India and then she goes to Bali. And when she was in Bali, she had learned how to meditate and in India and some other stuff. And she met a religious character. I can't remember what you call him, a guru. I'm not sure what he was. I can't remember, but a holy man. And he gave her a formula. So when you wake up, Liz, you're going to do this. And in the morning, you're going to do that. And then the afternoon, you're going to do this other thing. And so that's what she was doing. But then in the course of that, she met somebody and fell in love. And she had had a past traumatic event. Was just coming off a divorce. Anyway, so she eventually decides that he's throwing her off her balance. So she breaks up with him. And she goes back to see Katut, who's this wise man. And he says, what's wrong? There's something wrong, Liz. And she said, well, I stopped seeing him because he was throwing off my balance. And the medicine man, Katut, said, listen, Liz, sometimes to lose balance for love, that's living a balanced life. And if you think about that, like if you think about how much joy a loving relationship is going to bring for your entire life and all the pros and pluses, can you imagine giving that up because you're trying to come up with some formulaic basis for wellness? It doesn't work. So again, sometimes you have to give up one thing to get the overall life picture. But kind of my favorite analogy came by accident. I was out for a walk with my wife. It was extremely cold. In Canada, it gets cold sometimes. And I was trying to say, look, I'm trying to explain this balance thing, and I've got some analogies, but I need some help. And she goes, well, it's funny because it reminds me of when I started ballet dancing. She said, I always thought that I could get really powerful and I could get on stage and I could hit my spot, perfect balance, and hold it. But I never stopped. So no matter how powerful you are, you can't just hold balance. You're constantly moving. Not only are you moving, but there's other things happening around you that are exerting some pressures. So you're constantly in a state of falling off balance and regaining balance, and falling off balance and regaining balance. And that's what she realized. And what I love about that analogy too is not only does it describe how that's what life is like, we're forever gaining, losing, and regaining balance if we're trying to achieve balance, but also why it's really important to use these building block activities in all these different areas. Because imagine the ballet dancer. She's developing skills over a period of years, all these different moves, all these different recognitions that when she starts to go this way, she starts to fall to the left, she does this other activity to come pull her back to the right. And so I just love that analogy because it really explains kind of how I'm approaching balance with these concepts. I want to build up my activities that foster wellness. I want to get really good at them until they're second nature. And I also, like, you can also imagine when she was a kid, she probably had to think about what move to use to get herself back on balance. But when she was a more proficient dancer, it probably just happened naturally. So what if, like, just imagine the possibility. What if we can build up these areas, build up these activities, start living a pretty balanced life? And when we start to feel off, what if the activities to put us back on track start to kick in because we've practiced them so much over time? It'd be a pretty nice way to go. Anyway, so I
That
actually
was a
see
very
balancing as a special and unique act. That's a super act, I'll call it. Because if
mm,
you start thinking about how to balance and you can develop that as a skill, it's going to be a big help.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Earlier in the conversation, you talked about, when you sort of were just starting to take an interest in wellness, and you're thinking about the idea of nirvana, right, as the state, and how perhaps someone who's apparently there would not agree with the model that it's this place that you arrive at and then stay in, and that's been a shift in my perspective as well. I really loved this idea of, oh, I'm gonna be enlightened and I'm gonna meditate a lot and do all the whatever things that you need to do um, to do that. And my balance, I suppose, and my baseline of contentness and joy is much higher now that I don't spend my life comparing where I'm at to that goal, or working towards that goal. Um, the balance analogy that you provide, I think what's magical about that is that it's, well, with Nirvana, I think one of the metaphors, or one of the ways that people in that spiritual tradition try to describe the paradox, or there's this paradox of sort of, in order to not suffer or whatever, if you want to stop suffering, you have to accept suffering, right? It's the sort of apparently upside down thing of um, to feel good is to be okay with any feeling that comes, whether you like it or not, and just deal with it. And that's there's a similarity there to your idea of balance, right? True balance, and it's its own perfection, it's its own joy and sustaining joy in its own right. It is that it's not a thing that you get to, it's a toolkit, a strategy, an approach, which is a constant adaptation to whatever's there, to whatever's happening. It's a constant movement, and by being willing to adjust to whatever's coming in, suddenly you can be at this place where you're in balance.
Well, yeah, like, I can't remember if I mentioned this, but I stole a line from a movie, Life in Every Breath. It's from The Last Samurai, and I think it had something to do with the samurai tradition, but life in every breath. And I'm trying to understand what that means for me. And it's going to take a lifetime probably to figure it out. But one thing it definitely makes me think about is really I'm backing off all that stuff about all the figuring out if I'm well, figuring out if I'm balanced. I'm focusing on an action-based approach to life. I'm living my life by doing what I need to do. And that looks different every day. That looks different every hour. Right now I need to do this. Next I need to do that. And, again, I think that if you can be doing the things, working towards a well-rounded life, striving for excellence. And one of the things in the book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, I like is there's kind of a description of somebody who's pursuing quality, somebody who's pursuing excellence. And imagine somebody who's like an artist of some sort, and they're like honing their craft. They have to learn, let's say it's somebody who's a painter, but who uses some type of different kinds of material, not just paint, to create their structures and their pictures or their art. So they have to be really good at this, and then they have to know brush strokes, and then how to mix paints. And when they're doing all these things, they're not thinking about it. Their mind is kind of settled because they're working on all this stuff. They're not thinking about whether they're well. They're not thinking about whether they're balanced. They're working and they're striving for excellence. And I think that's more what I'm trying to get across is, yes, you want to understand these larger concepts like areas of wellness and activities. You want to start using your building blocks, developing them just like a ballerina would develop skills. But then you're just going about living your life and not always sitting back and wondering if you're doing that the right way or if this is going to lead to a better state. And I'd really like to have a conversation with somebody who's achieved nirvana. And I think they're going to tell me that they don't see it as a state, that it's quite similar, that they're living their life and they have a certain understanding about how the world works and how they work. And they're probably physical, and they probably take care of themselves physically, and they probably work on a whole bunch of different areas of wellness, and they're probably well-rounded. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of similarities, although I can't say that because I haven't had that conversation.
And I'm trying to remember, I think two very different spiritual teachers who I've read. One is Thich Nhat Hanh, and one is Ram Dass. Very different characters there. But one of them said they have this chapter in one of their books, After Nirvana, the Laundry, which is this idea that, you keep living your life. You have the same problems. You're in the same environment. It's not a fancy clothed sort of clothed chair that you sit on and you get to sit there bing, just like kind of with this big grin on your face, and you don't have to eat again, and you don't have to go to the bathroom again, and you don't need friends or whatever. Like it's not a different life. It's a different way of approaching and responding to life. I think it's an idea that needs to be challenged. This idea that there is some place that you reach that stays the same.
If I could, I noticed that there's a question in the chat. Would like to understand why you don't think there's a work-life balance.
Go for it.
Okay. People talk to me about this a lot. And for a long time, I was just like, well, I try and come up with an answer. And then I realized it's not a good question. The reason why I want to say there's no work-life balance, I think it's a bad question for me when someone says, what's a work-life balance? Because it misdirects, in my opinion. It makes it sound like there's an assumption that work is different from life, or that there's a competition between the two of them. And in my view, work is part of life. To me, it's part of my economic wellness. And I also think it suggests that work is associated with some kind of negative and life with some kind of positive. I can tell you that in my life, my work has enriched me tremendously. I've had a lot of opportunity to help people, to do good things, to use my mind, to stretch my intellect. It's been really rewarding. And also it suggests that you can find some kind of balance point, like a formula, which I've been arguing against. So I don't believe there's no work-life balance in the sense that you can't achieve balance. I don't think it's balance between work and life. I
Yeah.
think work is one of the activities within one of the categories of wellness, and that it's a really, really, really important one. And another really important message I would have for people is choose a profession that you like, in fact, that you love, because that'll be really rewarding and help your economic wellness. And so the other point is, instead of focusing on work versus life, I want to be really intentional about my activities. I only have so much time in the day. So I want to make sure I'm intentional and I'm doing activities that are worth my time. And that it helps to have these building blocks in place, because I tend to lean out more towards the right activities. So I think it's a bad question. I don't think it's a bad concept. I just think there's a better way to get to it.
Well, Ryan, who asked the question, says makes sense, which it does. Yeah, and also, you say all work is part of your economic wellness, but it's more than that. It can be part of your social
Yeah,
wellness, your artistic wellness. I mean, there's oftentimes, depending on the kind of work, um, there's the need to be creative, to come up with new solutions, to make things beautiful, um, intellectual wellness. I mean, all of that, right? So it is. It's a part of our lives, and I guess that's again just challenging that idea that a good life is a life where you don't have to do things. Actually, life is a
right.
place where you get to do things. Um,
Exactly.
yeah. So
But you
and
make another
you're not
really
going to
great.
get to do things forever. So you better while you're here.
No, it's
So
a great point, and one I forgot to mention too. That when you're coming up with your lists of activities, I'm I'm kind of mathy. I'm kind of formulaic logic type person.
Mhm.
I started coming up with a list, and I was kind of like distinguishing this goes with this and this goes with, and very quickly realized, don't be formalistic about it. Okay, there's lots of activities that bleed into all these areas. So it's not about having a formula. It's not about fitting things in places. It's what it's about is, it's really important to introspect, because believe me, Frank, your version of balance, your version of wellness is going to look a lot different than mine, which is going to look a lot different than anyone else's. And I'm a big proponent of not judging people about what they want to achieve for their wellness. And so when you're going through that, think more about the spirit of it and less about the formal aspect of it.
mm, mm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And just on that note of kind of stepping outside of the formulaic, I really appreciated your art metaphor, that your art analogy that you brought up a few minutes ago. Think of a painter. Yeah, they have to learn all of the stuff, but when you're creating a beautiful painting, you're not I guess cycling through the tips and tricks in your brain. You're just outpouring, and you're just doing it. And it was nice to look at that um, beautiful painting behind you as you describe that, and sort of think of the process there. But I think the art metaphor is really, really strong. One of the concepts that I bring up in almost every episode of this podcast is the sort of left brain, right brain distinction, as I've been reading about in McGilchrist's The Master and His Emissary, and this is an oversimplification, but basically this analytical, outcome oriented, linear thinking. There's that mode of thinking which is more associated with the left brain, and then there's another mode of thinking which is more associated with emotion, moment to moment experience, the enjoyment of art, social connection, which is more associated with the right brain. Um, and he does he sort of gives this challenge, or makes this remark that there's too much left brain kind of thinking going on in our culture at the moment, and it can it's a real loss. And we're really meant to, whilst analytical stuff is a fantastic tool, we're really, what's the balance, I guess, of left brain, right brain is to be rooted in that more holistic, interconnected, non-analytical way of thinking. Like that's kind of the ground out of which life happens. And in that book, he talks about music and musicians, and that really, really good musicians, um, there's a lot of left brain stuff going on there, because you have to learn a lot of skills. You learn chords and progressions, and you learn the finger arrangements for different whatever instrument you play, and you have to master all of that. But when you're playing live or when you're composing, you have to step outside of all of that, and that's what's needed to create something original, right? Because analytical thinking, trying to prescribe a formula, you can't create a beautiful a beautiful piece of art is original. A beautiful piece of art is an expression of you, of something felt, of something that's hard to put words on often, and you can't create that by having a set outcome in mind and ticking all the boxes of that outcome. So sort of that idea of life as an artwork, life as not a protocol, not a checklist, not ourselves either as some kind of technology or tool, but just life as an artwork. And we learn the tools; they're really, really useful. But once you get down to it, it is it's a felt process. It's a moment to moment process, and you put all of that aside and you just do, and you see where it takes you.
Yeah, and that's why, like, on one hand, I think it's really important to have these building blocks and develop your activities, develop your skills, be working, like, intentional about your activities, so you're doing these things. But ultimately, you kind of nailed it, like, in the sense of, if I was trying to explain where I'm trying to get to on a balanced side of things, it's the expression kind of being in the zone, and we can really understand it in the context of a musician or an artist when every once in a while they're just in the zone and everything is just right and they're expressing, it's all coming together. And it's interesting because one of the people I talked to in the podcast, she's a young student who just did some psychology, and she talked, like, she's the one who said, there's some concept about in the zone. I don't know anything about it, which is one of the reasons I like Mindform, because you've got Ryan who knows both philosophy and psychology. So, like, he probably could have some description of this that makes more sense. But if you can develop all these skills in your life, let's teach kids how to budget and all this stuff about finance. Let's teach them how to eat healthy and how much sleep they need. And let's all work on it as we get older. I wish I knew this when I was 20 and didn't figure out when I was over 50. And, let's develop all these skills, these actions. And so that maybe more often, like, I actually experienced a runner's high a couple times, which was really weird because I actually didn't believe there was a runner's high. I thought it was a myth, kind of like, I don't think I could ever be hypnotized. And probably because of that, I probably never will be hypnotized. But a couple times I was out for a run and everything felt perfect, and I had experienced a runner's high. It was so fleeting. It didn't even last a minute, but it was such a wonderful feeling. And what if that we start applying this technique in our lives, and we start developing these areas, and our activities get stronger, and just every once in a while, just like that musician, we hit the zone, and we just love that feeling, and we know it's fleeting, but just for a few minutes, we feel it. And then what if that comes back a little bit more often? So that's kind of the concept that I think that this very practical and approachable way to work towards balance and wellness can work. And again, you don't need any magic. You can figure out for yourself, Frank, what your categories are and what activities are going to strengthen your different categories of wellness. And by the way, you're going to have to work hard.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. I do this meditation, Vipassana meditation, which is part of this whole international kind of, I guess, meditation tradition, which was internationalized by this chap called Goenka, and it's meant to be, Buddha's kind of meditation that he did or whatever. But anyway, so just the other day I did a full day of that meditation, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with a couple little breaks in the middle. And one of the sentiments that comes up there is that, yeah, joy is not something you experience. It's and if you're feeling really good in your meditation, sort of if you're having this sort of runner's high, right, where it's like, oh, I just feel like tingly all over and I'm like blissing out. As soon as you cling to that, as soon as you're like, oh, I need to feel like this all the time, this is so good, this is how it's meant to be, this is how it's meant to be, that's when you're creating more suffering for yourself, or that's when you're really breaking it, because it is fleeting and it comes and it goes, and the sustaining joy comes from that's okay. I'm just going to enjoy this while it's here. It's going to go and it's going to come back. And as you're talking, you reminded me of this book by Abraham Maslow, A Psychology of Being. And he breaks up this distinction between a psychology of being and a psychology of doing. And it sounds a lot like your balance thing, whereas people in being, they have a lot of agency. He talks about them having like outlets for expression, having balanced lives, looking after themselves, and having peak experiences regularly. And peak experiences are something like a runner's high, but also it's people in art, it's people going on a tramp and looking out and seeing the view, and just these moments of bliss where I mean, you know what it's like because you've had your runner's high, but where the boundaries dissolve, you're just there in the moment and there's nothing else, and it feels good. And he sort of, he distinguishes that from a psychology of doing, which is the state of being where we're trying to get somewhere, and that just seems to keep coming up in this conversation. This approach of stop thinking there's a place you need to be and anxiously working towards that all the time. Step back, appreciate that things come and go. Yeah.
There's a lot of little moments that aren't runner's high, but are amazing little zones. And like now that basically what you're trying to do is savor those moments. And like even now, like the other day I went outside, it was a perfect day. I looked up, the sky was blue with puffy clouds, and the air was perfect, and I could feel it hitting my lungs. I could feel the oxygen because I can sense that more now. And I just stopped for a second and I'm just like, wow, this is just a moment. And if you just, to get a little corny for a second, I like to watch a lot of shows about the universe, how the universe works and all these different planets. If you think of how spectacularly lucky we are right now to be on this planet, to be able to look at the sky the way it is, and the trees and the leaves and the grass and everything else, it's spectacular. And every once in a while, it's not every day, like I don't walk around going, oh wow, everything's perfect. But there are many times now where if I'm leaving myself open to those moments, then I can stop for a minute and just, there's something I really appreciate, or maybe I'm riding my bike and I just happen to see a bird go by a certain way. So there's lots of little moments we can enjoy. And I wanted to make one other point too, that's kind of an important one from my context. You talked about bliss. It was slightly different context. We're talking about like, as soon as you try and hold that feeling, you lose it. So the better thing to do is just try and savor it. But I want to talk about happiness, because I think there's a lot of confusion about searching for happiness as well. And my life experience was that actually happiness worked against my wellness, because when I look back for many times in my life, I was happy. I have an amazing wife. I have an amazing family. I have great work. I have great friends at work and social life. There was a lot of really great things going on in my life that made me happy. But, whether I was using that as a mask, however you want to call it, I was hiding the fact that I was unwell in a lot of different ways. And to me, mental wellness is one of 8 categories. It's a really important one. And it's obviously one where if you start to experience serious issues with your mental health, it can affect everything in a dramatic way. And I'm not trying to belittle that. But mental wellness is only one of 8 categories in my approach. And also, mental wellness, like, it does involve states of mind, like happiness. But I don't always want to feel happy, because I know that in my life, there'll be times where I feel happiness or joy or hope, but sometimes I'll feel stress. Sometimes I'll feel anger. Sometimes I'll feel fear. All of these are natural reactions to certain circumstances. I want a healthy reaction to life circumstances, and that doesn't always mean being happy. So to me, it's great to be happy when that's the appropriate feeling, but I'm not going to try and live my life to always try and be happy as an end.
Yeah. Well, happiness is, I mean, who knows? Everyone's got different kinds of luck or whatever, but happiness is conditional in a lot of, it's conditional on things. I mean, yeah, you've got a awesome family situation, awesome work situation, but things can change, right? And you need to find something that sustains through that. And I also think, it's happiness is an interesting word, because people, I think, use it to mean different things. Some people say happiness and they mean pleasure. Some people say happiness and maybe they mean wellness or balance. Some people say happiness, maybe they mean calmness or contentness. Maybe sometimes people just mean the lack of misery when they say happiness. It varies, but
I think it's
I think,
usually tied to state of mind,
yeah,
though. Like,
yeah, totally, I agree.
and not all of wellness is. I'll give you another really simple to understand example. You know this person, we all do, and maybe we were that person at one point in our life. Your finances are spiraling out of control. Your credit card debt is getting higher and higher. You can't pay your bills. And when you do think about it, it makes you feel bad. It makes you feel unhappy. And so you don't think about it. So when your friend calls and says, let's go to the club, you do. when your other friend calls and says, let's go to a movie and you can't afford it, you do. And you're just digging your hole worse and worse. So although you're working to stay happy and not be unhappy, you're putting yourself in such a bad financial situation that you're crushing your financial wellness. And that's going to come back to haunt you, because each of these categories is really important and any one of them can really cause a lot of trouble. Now, another quick point just that I remember is I often call this 8 category approach a shield of resilience. And that's, like if you actually look on the website, you'll see that I have this logo, it's circular, the things are intertwined. But if you can imagine that as a shield, if I have 6 out of my 8 categories in pretty good shape, pretty strong, and I experience a mental health situation or a financial distress situation, there's a good chance that that'll mitigate the impact, right? So
Absolutely.
it's another advantage of building up these different areas, these different categories, because you're creating a shield. If they're all falling apart, you're in big trouble. But if 6 or 5 out of the 8 are strong, it might help you weather the storm a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's again, it's that trying to hold on to a state of mind. And I think I was just, I've been taking lots of notes actually during this call, and I was just drawing these lines of connection between the different facets that you've listed out that are relevant for you. And I'm sure lots of them are relevant to lots of us, definitely, certainly most, if not all of them for me. And that, you know, your mental, you can't even hold. So say you're just trying to preserve that one, right? You're trying to feel good, or you're trying to, or you get the other people who focus on just something else. They're trying to live forever, or you get people who just trying to be rich, and everything else is falling to that because they've got it locked in their mind that this is the thing, that I need, and it's not this one thing, and you need to appreciate all the different aspects. But I think also you sabotage that one thing that you're focusing on, even itself, right? By ignoring everything else, because you can't feel happy all the time. You're gonna feel really miserable at some point if everything else is falling apart while you chase happiness.
Well, let me give
Yeah,
you another quick example. I'm not going to get into politics. I won't drag you down into that. But there's obviously a lot of shenanigans going on right now, coming out of the US
well
and
said.
a certain person. And like, if you think about, like, what if I were to propose that you could apply these 8 categories to trying to come up with good approaches to politics and how people live their lives and how money should be spent by countries and whatnot? And, one might argue that right now there's a hyper focus on finances with no focus on social, mental health, physical, the rest of it. And that is an easy way to explain why some of the stuff that's happening right now is uncomfortable for so many people, because for most of us, life isn't only about getting the most gold coins and piling them up as high as you can. There's about a whole bunch of other stuff too.
There's a lot. Yeah, absolutely. In New Zealand, my home country, where I am right now, we in the last, or maybe the one before, term, where we got prime ministers. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, I think, organised this, but there was like well, you know how you have GDP, gross domestic product. She sort of came up with another measure, which was something like measuring mental wellness,
Right.
mental health, and kind of at least created it and tried to move us a little bit towards, hey, let's think about that when we're measuring how well we're doing as a country. Let's consider that important, just like we consider GDP important.
Yeah, environment,
And
really
that's,
important.
yeah,
Environment's very important, and there's financial benefits to approach being green in a whole bunch of areas. So, again, I don't want to drag down into a political discussion, but except to say that it makes sense to apply. And I think I might do that as kind of a project in the next few years, is to try and now take this approach to these different categories of wellness and try and figure out how you might start thinking about that in the context of making decisions about what we do as a country and how we make decisions. And of course, it's complicated by the fact that we live in a world where there's many countries and many different approaches to these things.
yeah. Well, I think it's a great idea. Our country, you said, oh, you think New Zealand at the start of the call, you said New Zealand might be doing quite well in terms of mental health, maybe relative to Canada. I'm not sure, but we're in an interesting situation where we have kind of a mental health epidemic as a country. We got really, really high suicide rates and internationally by international standards and a few things like that. But we do also have, we're trying in a lot of ways. And I think the indigenous wisdom that we have in our country has contributed to that. So that's the Māori. And there's, they have, like I learned in my psychology degree, we've started to incorporate Māori understandings of like holistic, different areas of wellness. So they have the 4 walls, the whare tapa whā, so whare, house, whā is 4. Anyway, so whare tapa whā, 4 walls, which is, I think, spiritual, physical, social, mental. And that, to have a strong house, you need, or a strong whare, you need all of those to be there. And the whole thing and each aspect of it is sabotaged when one is broken. And I think the incorporation of that and more holistic approaches into how we respond to mental health, the attempt to put this measure into our national, measuring how well we're doing as a country, that's a really positive step. And I think we see an impact of that, of appreciating that there's just multiple aspects to the whole human endeavor and to the whole doing well thing. There's these different components and they all need to be considered. And I think for some reason, and maybe it's to do with the left brain, right brain thing, but it is much more, it's an approach that the Western way of thinking can learn from indigenous thinking for sure.
Well, I mean, I'm very grateful because I don't think the point would have come up in that mental health first aid course that I was on, and that wouldn't have been out there running, thinking about all this stuff, and it wouldn't have come up with this. So it's really great. And that, that's another thing too I love is I think that I've decided that my favorite trait in myself is curiosity. And that's why one of the things I love about Mindform too is there's a lot of people who are curious and willing to talk and share ideas. Some of them good, some of them maybe not so good, but in the end, you got to talk them through and
Absolutely.
And keep an open mind. Don't be judgmental about what other people think in terms of their categories or the activities that they want to do. Obviously, we have to live in a safe world and keep it safe, but for the most part, it's a person specific approach, and you have to figure out. I can give you the framework, and then it's up to you to figure out how you make it work for yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's, yeah. I also, creativity is one of my favorite traits in people because it just opens the door to everything else when you're not stuck, when you're not fixed. And I
It
also
keeps
love
you
that
from
about
being too
mindfulness.
judgmental, right? Like if you're curious, you're like, oh, really? Help me understand that. It's
Oh,
great.
totally. I mean, you wouldn't get to a place where you are even able to understand what is it that I need and how can I achieve that without a little bit of curiosity. If you're locked into this is what's important and this is how I get there, you're a bit screwed.
Yeah. That's partially why too I have my strategic plan at such a high level because, I know that I'm going to have another bunch of conversations this year with other people, and they're going to help me better understand things. And I want the flexibility to to approach it
Right.
again and maybe improve it. But right now, I'm feeling really good about growing, trying to become well-rounded, leaning into hard work, making sure I work together with other people to do the best I can.
Awesome. I've maybe a last question for you, which is for people who are sort of wanting to think about wellness, starting to think, okay, I want balance, and they're appreciating that this is something that's valuable. How maybe if you could like give some guidance, some first steps, something like that for someone for this 3-step process that you have, right? Identifying the facets of wellness, finding activities, and the wellness check, like helping someone get to a place. How do you how do you know what your facets are? How do you find out what is working for you? Like, what's the reflective process there? Um, and how do you know when something needs work?
So a couple things. I think, I don't think it's a mystery if it comes to figuring out the areas of wellness. I would actually just start with doing internet searches. I mean, we live in a world where you can do
Mhm.
lots of internet searches, search for things like categories of wellness, areas of wellness. If you want to look up my stuff, the book's Accidentally Well, the podcast is Let's Be Well Together. It's got my 8 areas, but just start reading about it. What does financial wellness look like? What is economic, or sorry, what does spiritual wellness look like? Spiritual is one of the hardest for me because I'm not religious. So I've had
Mhm.
to, I've been doing a lot of reading and learning about that to try and understand people who are spiritual but not religious. What are some of the concepts they associate with that? So I'm learning too. Um, there is something though that I just want to do a shout out to Ryan, because he said something in Become Who You Are, his book Become Who You Are, which I think is important for people to think about too. Like, you're thinking about yourself, okay? You're thinking about what areas are important to you, the way you want to develop yourself in a way that feels good. And he has the concept of trying to understand what you admire, the characteristics of yourself that you admire about yourself. And there's different ways that he talks about figuring that out. Like, for example, if you're too self-conscious, ask your friends, like, what is it about me that you admire? Um, it's really because if you do want to become an excellent person, if you do want to pursue excellence, if you do want to try and do the right thing through good activity, a good place to start is to looking into yourself. And I would actually add, I have a list of questions in my book for the check-in.
Oh, awesome.
And
Yeah.
I would even add, the concept from Ryan, that what are the characteristics of myself that I admire in myself? Am I pursuing those things? Am I living in the authentic life that I want to live according to those things? But going back to your question then, so to just start doing some searches on areas of wellness. And then that's the step 1, figure out your areas of wellness. The step 2 is now try and figure out the activities that are associated with that area. You can, again, read books, look on the internet, talk to your friends, think about your life experience. And the third step is the check-in. That one you can figure out the best way to do it. I like to literally write down every time I find an activity that fosters an area, I include it on a bullet point list, because that's how I remember things. But if you're like my wife, you just stick it in your head and you keep it in your mind.
Mhm.
Hmm. How do you so there's this sort of the daily process you say, I think you said before we went live, maybe, when you're feeling off, so to speak, which is different to feeling unhappy, right? And you so I guess a question would be, when you're feeling off, what do? You kind of look at these bullet points and go, oh, okay, you know what, I think it's this that's missing, and oh, here's an activity that I know I can do that's going to help. Is that sort of the process for you?
Well, initially I would, but now it's more, I just kind of intuitively know it. Like, but the most important thing
Yeah.
to me, there's 2 ways I usually feel
Art.
off. It's either I feel either sick to my stomach, or I feel a lot of pressure in the back of my head. And usually it's just the matter of stop the spinning, stop the ignoring, just stop,
Mm,
recognize that I'm
Right.
off. Once I do that, I usually know what the problem is. Like, I have to get to this thing that I haven't gotten to.
yeah,
A
yeah.
lot of times it's financial. I haven't done this other thing, or I was sick, so I didn't exercise for 3. This one gets me all the time. I'm grumpy, irritable, and I say to my wife, I'm grumpy, I'm irritable. And she goes, yeah, when's the last time you went for a run? Like, yeah, I've been sick for 3 weeks. So I usually just know now from experience. And that's the advantage of having lived through this approach for a few years. But the important thing is admit that you're feeling off, and then it probably won't be too hard for you to pinpoint why.
Absolutely. I think that's very encouraging as well, that you can get to that place, where you have this recognition of what your ways of getting off balance are, and what that feels like as well. And that aspect of just stopping and checking in is so important, right? Because we get locked in, we get in this head zone of you're just focused on what you're focused on, and you need to sometimes you need to ask a new question, right, to get a new solution. And I had that experience quite recently, and it was, I suppose, if we're looking at your facets, it would have been mental unwellness, where I was, I've been thinking a lot about goals and fitness and all these different things, actually, like different facets, and trying to perform well in there. But there was just this thought pattern that was going on, and it was a bottleneck for everything. It was pulling down everything else. And it took, wherever that came from, for me, it was through the mindfulness that I've doing with this meditation. It took stepping back and noticing, oh, actually, this is, this is something I've been ignoring. This is one aspect that I've just not been looking at, and seeing that and resolving that, and then that creates space for everything else.
Yeah, a quick point there on mindfulness. Mindfulness techniques are amazing, and they definitely have a place. The one thing I would suggest, though, is like sometimes if you are spinning and you're just feeling whatever out of control or whatever it happens to be, and you have a mindfulness technique that helps you kind of stop that, that's fantastic. The one thing I might suggest, though, is once you're feeling better again, maybe I want to pause there and then say, and now what? And just say to yourself, why did I feel like that in the first place? Like, it's great to have the mindfulness techniques to overcome these challenges, but to me, it's kind of a temporary fix. And then the next question is, maybe you don't have the answer. Maybe you can't identify it immediately, but it's worth taking a few minutes to stop at that point and say, can I identify what's wrong? You might be able to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Ryan would, who is listening, I think still would agree with you on that one. And that's a shift in perspective I've had as well, actually, that, mindfulness is most powerful as a tool to get new perspective, to take new action. Like that's the superpower there, because again, you can't hold on to that. You can't just get into a nice feeling and then just cling to that.
I just don't see it as a end result. It's another tool in your toolbox, a really important one, but it's a tool.
There are no end results. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you very much, John. I'm happy to end it there, unless there's something you want to add.
No, I really enjoyed the conversation, Frank. And like often, you said a few things that have me thinking again and have helped me.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I've been doing a bit of writing recently, and I've got all these notes, and some of them tie into what I've been thinking about. So I'm gonna utilize that. So I really appreciate talking to you and your unique wisdom and your perspective. And I hope we get a chance to talk again, John. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
All the best, Frank.
See you later.
Thanks for listening to the Mindform podcast. I'm Ryan A. Bush, founder and author of Designing the Mind and creator of Mindform. Mindform is an exclusive community and training platform for sculpting your psychological software. Members get access to a group of like-minded psychotechs, including all of our guests on this podcast, gamified growth tools, events and retreats, and a collection of transformative programs for mental health and self-mastery. You can learn more and apply to join at mindform.io/podcast. I hope to see you inside.